this gentleman. He's become a friend of mine for the past few years. I call him General. He really isn't a general. He was a colonel that was bestowed upon him by the Chinese. He actually was a sergeant when he was in, but the pay grade was sergeant, unfortunately. But there isn't much opportunity these days to be able to hear someone of this caliber, and it just
and this age.
In this age, he's 92. He drove himself here. I offered to pick him up. He said, I drive. He drives everywhere. He drives his wife nuts.
I'm still ambulatory, you know.
And he drives his wife nuts. But,
that's true, I drive her too.
Yeah. But anyway, Al Johnson lives here in Hudsonville. He's going to share some of his story. How many of you know about OSS or OSI? How many of you have heard of it? You've heard of it, yeah?
Yes.
He's going to give you a briefing on that. And then our character development lesson tonight is going to have to do a little bit with what Memorial Day stood for. And I know that Al has lost a lot of friends that he had at the service. But fortunately, we've still got him. And fortunately, he loves what we do and is interested in what we do. And he was, every time I ran into him for the past 6 months, he says, when can I come and speak? I really want to come talk to the cadets again. So without further ado, Al Johnson, 92 years old. Let's stand.
This is going to be a history lesson, but there's not going to be any exam, which is nice. But kind of like an ancient history. You heard of the Second World War, I assume. And in June of 1942, President Roosevelt and General Donovan got together to make an organization that was called the Office of Strategic Service, which is now the CIA and Special Forces. But at that time, the idea was to get grassroots information and spy necessities right from the grassroots. And so this organization was created, and it was made up of volunteers. You couldn't get in, you weren't drafted into this, you had to volunteer to get into it. And the qualifications or the specifications on the bulletin board where I volunteered said hazardous duty with a short life expectancy, and I knew that's what I wanted. Not the life expectancy, but hazardous duty. So I joined the OSS. Now, in order to get into the OSS, you had to have at least had a high school education. So don't fail to get your education, guys. Now it'll take a degree out of college, but at that time, a high school education was sufficient. Also, you had to be able to pass mental tests to determine whether or not you could live behind enemy lines for an extended period of time. Now, discipline in the OSS was minimal because everybody was a volunteer and everyone knew what their job was to do. Very little discipline was necessary. You were chosen because you could think on your feet, and that was an important factor. Now, the qualifications, we had demolition experts, mortarmen, machine gunners, engineers, radio operators, medic. Anyone had a specialty in any field was usually chosen above anyone else that was there. Not many volunteered, by the way. I happen to have been a medic, and I had surgical training, so when I was stationed in Denver, Colorado, the bulletin board notice came on, and because I had surgical training, I was one of 15 that were taken. The groups that were involved, you had to have the ability to speak a foreign language or the ability to learn a foreign language. I happened to be in the French group, but there were the Germans group, the Italians, the Balkans, which included Greece and Yugoslavia, Norwegians, and of course the Chinese, which the French became the Chinese group. Of course, Chinese was not a language anyone knew. But anyway, we'll get to that later in the hour. Because of the special type of training that we were to undergo, we could not take advantage of any of the military installations. We had to have, because we were an organization that didn't exist in one sense of the word. According to the military, we didn't exist anyway. So we were kind of orphans. But we used the National Park Services, and all the national parks were at our disposal. We took our basic training at Congressional Country Club. And we blew up the country club, not the building itself, but the golf course was a mess when we finished with our mortars and demolitions. And from there we had 6 weeks of intensive basic training in OSS at the Congressional. From there we went to Camp David. It wasn't known as Camp David at that time, but became Camp David after Eisenhower became president. So we took another 6 or 8 weeks of advanced training in weaponry and tactics, and et cetera. When we got up in the morning at the Congressional, we had a 5-mile run. Then we had breakfast, and then we had an hour of calisthenics. And then by 6 o'clock, we could go out and do our whatever duties we had to do, or whatever training we had to learn. We wanted desperately to take our parachute training at Fort Benning, Georgia. But someone decided that a convoy was leaving Newport News, Virginia for Africa, and we had to be on it. So that terminated our ability, or our chance of taking our parachute training at Fort Benning. But Benning had a school in Algiers, and that's where we took our five jump qualification. And after we had our jump training in Africa, then the Italians and the Germans and the Balkans stayed in North Africa, and the French and the Norwegians went on to England. And when we got to England, and by the way, we had no escort. It was just it was a fast sailing ship. But what got us was we don't have an escort and it's a fast sailing ship. What if we run into a submarine? What are we going to do? Turn around and run? But anyway, we made it to England without too much difficulty. Landed in Liverpool. Went over to they had a building established, a manor hall called Brock Hall, outside of Northampton, England, where we billeted ourselves. We had rather kind of luxury living all the places we went. With the Congressional, that was in a sumptuous clubhouse, which we used like we knew what we were doing. And of course, Brock Hall was owned by Lady and Lord Thornton, and they let us use the facilities there, which they had they had horses, they had a chapel, they had their own graveyard, their cooking facilities, and of course housing. So we felt we were rather spoiled. This looks impressive when I turn a page like that. They think I'm really knowing what I'm doing.
Hey, Al, tell them about going up in the airplane for the very first time.
Oh, yes, of course. Of course, I was brought up during the Depression, and the only airplanes you saw were those that were flying overhead with 2 wings and, doing acrobatic stunts and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, when I got to North Africa and took our training, it's the first time I've been in an airplane. The first time I've been in an airplane, I jumped out of it. Didn't take a look. And they thought I was smart. Anyway, I don't remember landing in an airplane until we got out of France. So I had 11 jumps in by that time. 11 times I had to step out. And well, anyway, we got to Brock Hall, and there we had some additional training in weaponry. These books that I have here show a lot of the stuff that I'm telling you, and some of the pictures and et cetera. And there, one of them was called the House of Death, and it was a building that taught us how to fire close combat with Colt 45. And you ran through it, and things popped up in a matter of putting a hole in them. Anyway, also we had training with hand-to-hand combat with a knife. Fairburn was Colonel Fairburn was the teacher, and he was excellent. He got every one of us every time. But it taught us a few things, I think. Each man carried a knife on the inside of his boot, because we didn't want the risers to catch the handle, and we had some guys coming down upside down because the risers were caught in the wrong place. Okay, in order to get into France, by the way, we didn't go in on Normandy, we went on southern invasion of France. We supported the southern invasion of France, and I'll tell you about that in a little while. But in order to get into France, we had to learn how to parachute out of a bomber. Now, the B-24 Liberator bomber, is anyone familiar with that? I have a picture of that shows here. And this organization was called the Carpetbaggers. I don't know why they call themselves the Carpetbaggers, but that was a bad word during the Civil War, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. Yeah, but anyway, they called themselves the Carpetbaggers. They were painted black. All of the bombers were painted black, and that's how they took us into France. They took all the OSS personnel out of England in B-24 Liberators. There was 5 men to an airplane, plus about 6 container chutes. The container chutes were probably as long as this table, and they were kept in the bomb bay, and we parachuted through the ball turret in the bottom. They took that out and left a hole approximately this large around, and that's how we exited the airplane. I can tell a little incident of that too. When we exited the airplane, one of our illustrious mates took a hand grenade, took the cap off, dumped all the powder out, put the cap back in, and when he left the plane, he pulled the pin and dropped it behind him. And I guess everybody was crawling on the wall, we found out. But all it would was, and nothing happened, nothing exploded. But this is the type of individual that we worked with. Well,
You were behind enemy lines at that time. You were going behind them.
yeah, we went about, well, several hundred miles behind enemy lines in order to, our assignment in England, from England, was to capture a hydroelectric plant at Aiguezone, France. Now, the southern invasion needed the electricity that the hydroelectric plant was generating, because it was a massive plant. And there's pictures in here also. Some of the pictures I took, I had a small camera, but some of the pictures I just went to the local pharmacy and bought snapshots, just like a vacationer would do. But
You weren't in uniform, of course.
pardon?
Not in uniform, of course.
Oh yes, definitely we're in uniform. The Geneva Convention required you to be in uniform.
Okay.
Even though the Germans did not recognize that and gave orders to kill all the OSS on site, mm-hmm. we still had to wear uniform in order to be in with the law of the Geneva Convention. Sorry if I stumble a little bit, but my mind is working faster than my tongue. Yeah, we had to capture a hydroelectric plant in order to save the electricity for the southern part of France. After we captured the plant, then we were free to do whatever we wanted to do. So blowing up bridges was a hilarious experience. Felling trees across roads, doing ambush work. Our war guys and ladies was of short existence. In other words, maybe a half an hour or 45 minutes of intensive fighting, and then everybody disappeared. The French, we had anywhere from 200 to about 1,200 French underground or Maquis that we could call upon in order to aid us in whatever we were doing. So we had plenty of firepower. Of course, the container chutes that we came in with had all kinds of ammunition and weaponry. And you'll find in these articles here there's some of the contents of the container chutes in here, like that.
You're all gonna have a chance to come up
We'll all
and
have a
look
chance to-
afterwards.
Right. Anyway, we had all that assistance, and by the way, the French hid us. We lived in barns and basements and woods and wherever the French would hide us. There were only 18 of us that went into France, and there's not a lot of firepower with 18, but we supplied arms and ammunition for the French, who were very giddy to get that. And so we had enough personnel to take care of any particular incident that we came across. The troops were moving, the German troops, after the invasion of southern France in August, we jumped in at 1:20 in the morning, August 12th, into France. I think it's my wife. Sorry. We had, where was I again?
Jumped into France?
Yeah, jumped into France.
Yeah, 1:20 in the morning, August 12th. I think the southern invasion of France was about the same time, and they were driving the German troops up through our part and back into Germany. And of course, the fun part was harassing them, trying to, not necessarily stopping them, but just harassing them. It was a physical war as well as a psychological war. The more confusion we created out in the field there, the more confused the Germans were. They didn't know where we were going to hit next. And most of our work was done at night. Very seldom did we go out during the day, but most of it was done in the dark of night. And our training at Camp David was to field strip all the weapons blindfolded, because they knew that we'd be working at night, and at night you can't see as well as you can in the daytime. What a logical statement that was. And so we learned to take apart all the weapons and field strip them and clean them and put them back together again. So our work was done at night. And after we were overrun by the American forces, then that gave us the liberty of leaving for England. And I remember an American tank come down the road. What are you doing here? He says, what are you doing here? Well, we've been here a month. Where you been? Anyway, as soon as the Americans overran us, then we captured a small airfield and that the Germans had been using, and called in the C-47, and they took us back to France. Now, this was an interesting part. When you're in training for parachuting, you jump out of 1,000 to 1,200 feet, which gives you about 90 seconds of fall between when the chute opens at about 150 foot and when you hit the ground. But when we went into France in the bombers, we went in at 500 feet. Yeah, I know. Well, it's about, had just about enough time to say, I wonder if they do bang. You're in the ground. But, the reason we did that is because they flew under the radar. And we used the bombers because of the container chutes that we had, the containers that we had to carry in beside the personnel. And so it also felt or sounded like a bombing run. And that's why we came in at 500 feet. We were ready to blame the pilot of insubordinate, or in whatever it was. I can't think of all those words anymore. Anyway, they assured us that they were doing the right thing. Anyway, we came in at 500 feet, and it was a shock to all of us. But the French underground, the Maquis, quick picked us up and brought us to our night at where we were going to stay. Each individual was given a silk map. Now, the reason we had silk map is because silk does not mold and it doesn't wear out. This hasn't been used as that much because I'm not there anymore. But anyway, the silk map was an interesting thing. Also, they also issued us a small compass. Now, this was what happened with this. Let me tell you about the compass. I just got this article from someone I knew that was interested in OSS, but in here, a man in England had the privilege or the license for making the Monopoly game. And the Monopoly game was produced and sent to the prisoners in Germany. But he figured out a way of putting a compass in one of the Monopoly pieces, and he put a red dot on that piece to let the prisoners know that the compass was in that particular piece of Monopoly. And that's where this compass came from. Well, they issued this compass to us, not in Monopoly games, of course, but we were playing hide and seek with the Germans. But that was...
He'll have that on the table so
And
you
it
can
still works.
actually feel it.
And
It's
they
tiny.
also gave it, and this is hard to get out of this little packet, by the way, but they also gave us 2 saw blades, which you put in your jump boots. And hopefully they didn't have metal detectors in those days, so they couldn't tell whether you had saw blades on your... Anyway, we didn't plan on getting captured, so we didn't have the need for all this. But it did serve a purpose for the prisoners. Now, we got out of France. Well, I hope I'm not taking all your time.
Come on,
Okay.
you're fine.
We got out of France and we had the privilege of either volunteering to go back into the service in the regular army or volunteering to go to China as espionage agents. So naturally everybody volunteered. By the way, we did not lose a man in France, but we lost 2 men in China. Well, anyway, we got home, had a 30-day leave, which I spent about 3 weeks at home, and I couldn't tell my folks what I was doing. Even though they asked what I had done, I wasn't able to talk. So it was rather embarrassing. I felt bad about it, but I thought I'd better leave and go back to Washington because I wouldn't have to explain what's happened. But anyway, I volunteered to go to China, and we ended up in India, took a freight train over to Calcutta, and then we tried to get over the hump. Now the hump, the hump is the Himalaya mountains. And during the war, they said you had to fly the hump. Well, I was flying the Himalaya mountains, but you had to have a privilege or a chit or whatever they call them nowadays. Anyway, you had to have a rank in order to get an airplane ride over the hump. We didn't have that because we didn't exist. We were traveling DEML, that's Detached Enlisted Men, and so anybody could have picked us up. If any organization come through and needed a radio operator, they'd snap up our Jim Gardner. Or if I needed a medic, I'd have to go. But we fought, our captain, that's the highest rank we had. Captains are important. He fought tooth and nail to keep us all together. But because we couldn't fly, alternative was to drive the Burma Road. And I have pictures of that in here somewhere. Anyway, there was 50 of us, so a shipment of trucks and Jeeps came through, and they had to get over there, and the only way to get over there was to go through the Burma Road. And that was an exciting experience. We drove the 1,200 miles, that was the Lido Burma Road, so the two together. I think the Lido Road's 400 miles, and the Burma Road is 1,200. But it took us 100 miles a day. It took us 12 days to go 1,200 miles. We did about 100 miles a day, and that was about 16 hours driving a day, because it was very, very slow. You hardly got out of first gear. But you'll find that interesting road that it's all switchback turns on the.
Not a paved 4-lane highway.
Not a paved, no, matter of fact, the coolies were still working on it.
Yeah.
On that thing, yeah. And the Salween River Bridge, I understand they changed the name to another name from Salween River. But that was an experience in itself. It was a suspension bridge that only one vehicle at a time could go over. And it kind of like stuffing a sausage, you know. But anyway, we had that experience. So anyway, we got to Kunming. We had you'll see pictures in here of the facilities that we stayed in. They're thatched huts. And there we trained Chinese commandos. Now, each small group of friends, there were 12 of us in China, from our group, and each 12 had a group of 200 Chinese commandos that they trained. Well, you had to train them everything. We even had to do physical and dental work on them. They were in such terrible physical shape. So I remember we pulled 95, I took a needle, and the doc came behind me with a pliers and pulled 95 teeth in one day. Yeah, that's nothing. Anyway, we fixed them up physically and hopefully mentally, and trained them in the use of the weapons, 45 and we issued them the 03. That's in the First World War, bolt action Enfield 03. And I remember I had to clean those stupid guns. All the gasoline left, I think, from the First World War. It ran right down that gasoline, was a mess. But anyway, we trained the Chinese commandos, and then we parachuted in with them. By the way, they took their jump training also. There was 5 jumps, and I earned the American parachute wing, the English commando jump wings, and the Chinese jump wing. And so anyway, we ended up with 181 Chinese and 12 Americans, including, I think, was 3 officers. And by the way, for the benefit of the officers here, there's a nice part about OSS. We call them by their first name or their nickname. No, rank was never important. Saluting was never important. I love that part. But anyway, that's for your benefit. Anyway, we had our 200 Chinese commandos. We parachuted into the city called Hunglameo, which is in the Haoqing, Changsha, Hanyang rice triangle, the center of China. That's where Japan was taking all the rice they could get and shipping it over to Japan and leaving the people in China starving. And our objective was to try to prevent or slow down the flow of rice out of China. So we landed and stayed in the Buddha temple, which was an experience. And from there, I think about 3 days later, we attacked the Japanese at the city of Lizitzen, which was about 30 miles from where we were, and of course there were no roads. You walked between rice paddies. So we walked all night and hit the Japs in the morning, and we had the use of 200 Chinese commandos. By the way, we were at the frontal attack, good place to be. We had some guerrilla forces that were flanked us on the left, and we had the Chinese Nationalist Army that flanked us on the right. Neither one were any good. Their flanking movement was so far away that you could, I don't think the rifle could shoot that far. But anyway, after about an hour's fighting, we had to withdraw because we were losing so many Chinese commandos, even though the Japs suffered greatly in that score also. And so it was not what you call a success, but we lost 2 guys, and we withdrew to our Buddha temple. And then right after, about a week later, the bombs were dropped on Japan, and that ended the war for the Americans, for most of the Americans anyway, not us. The radio message came through that we should stay there and keep fighting for 30 days longer because not all the Japs have surrendered. You realize I'm going through this when I talk, so if I don't look at you, it's not that I don't like you. Anyway, none of us could speak Chinese. I was surprised that we came through alive out of China because we were tall, the Chinese were short. Not that you couldn't see us. And we couldn't speak Chinese, but we worked through interpreters. I had a medical student as my interpreter, so that gave us an edge. And but we had, I think, 5 interpreters for our 12 men, and that's how we communicated, which was not the best way to communicate because there's always information lost in interpretation. Anyway, we stuck around there for, and this next is the irony of it all. We stuck around there for about 30 days, and then we received information through the radio that we should go to Hanyang and accept the surrender of the Japanese. We got to Hanyang, and Hanyang is about the size of Grand Rapids. Okay, and there's all these troops, all carrying their weapons, and there's half a dozen Americans walking in there, strutting their stuff, thinking we've done so much, and they want us to take the surrender, which we did, but we couldn't disarm all the Japanese. But it worked out fairly well. Our war lasted 30 more days. Oh yeah, and by the way, the radios were interesting. It was the old coffee grinder generator, man on each side, handle, so you could each have a handle, you ground this way. And you kept going and kept going and kept going until Jimmy Gardner, our radio man, said, I can't hear you, got a ground failure. Try to get the Chinese to do it. But the Chinese, the problem with the Chinese, their legs were strong because they carried these baskets all the time. But the rest of their body was not strong. But that was the fun part of training them to shoot a rifle. They were so short. The rifle was rather long. We put them in a squat position and pull the trigger, and they'd fall back. That was our form of humor those days. But anyway, we made it back, and I guess that's the synopsis of the whole thing. But
You're open for questions.
Oh, definitely. If I don't have questions, I don't think anyone heard me.
There's so much.
Yeah, come on, anybody have a question?
No
Go ahead.
question is stupid, seriously.
Well, when you're talking about like how they're like bombing at 500 feet, so were you jumping off while they were bombing?
No, they weren't bombing.
Okay, because
No,
you
the
said that they're at 500
carpetbaggers were strictly personnel vehicles.
They were
Okay,
bombers,
you
but
said
they
you
were
were
They were
set up.
bombers, but only because they had the bomb bomb bays full of containers.
And troops.
And five of us, there's five of us around, sitting on our hind end around the hole, put your feet in and gone.
Over here.
Yes, sir.
In which field of battle did you feel the most nervous for your life?
In China. Right, because you were so obvious, you know. Yes, ma'am.
What year did you start serving?
In 1943. I have, yeah,
How old were you?
oh, I was just turning 19. I was 18 and 3/4. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, sir.
What is that?
What is this?
Yeah.
You're gonna be able to come up and
Well,
see
that's,
that.
the French government knighted me as, with the Legion of, the French Legion of Honor medal. And that's the letter of transmittal, and this is the medal itself.
That's cool.
I was very pleased to receive that. And of course, all the other medals I have here, and so, come on up and look.
Any other questions?
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Okay, any, go ahead, John.
Lieutenant.
Hey, I do have a question about the Burma Road. So you're on that for 12 days, right?
Yes, sir.
So, did you stop at times to rest, or did they just switch
Yeah.
drivers, or?
We stopped at time to rest at night.
Okay, so you drove during the day.
Drove during the day, right, for early morning. And I think just twice we ran into some Army camps that had hot meals. The rest of the time we ate K rations.
Okay. And, no, it's a pretty wild part of the world.
It is, yes. Well, matter of fact, the Japs were still active in the area when we drove it.
So they're active there, and it's the jungle.
It is jungle, yeah. But in the Himalayas where we were, it wasn't so jungle.
There's a good picture of the Burma Road up here. So that you'll be
Picture
able
of
to
Burma Road, yeah.
to take a look.
But, yeah, there was one spot, they had a whole bunch of orchids, so I stopped and covered my Jeep with orchids.
Sean, you had a question?
Yeah, you, the energy plant in France?
Yes.
Could you give us some more, like, info on that? Like, how exactly you, captured it?
Okay, well, there's two ways of doing things. The right way and the Army way, I know. But anyway, what we did is we bluffed them. We called a bluff. Now here, we're 18 people in the middle of France, a couple hundred miles from our lines. You can't take a prisoner. What are you going to do with a prisoner if you take him? You know, you got to feed him, you got to house him, you got to guard him, and all. So taking prisoners is out of the question. So when it comes to the hydroelectric plant, we have to bluff them. We had to call a bluff. So we told them that we sent an envoy in under a white flag and said, got a whole bunch of American soldiers here, and we're going to attack in the morning. Unless you guys leave, you're going to be out of luck. So we expect you out of here by X number of hours in the morning. And so we, tongue-in-cheek, we waited till all night, and then when we got there the next day, they were gone.
12 of these guys.
Yeah. So they're gone. Well, that's all right. So we thought, well, hot dog, we're going to stay in this barracks, beautiful big, you'll see the pictures in here. Nice big barracks, we'll have a nice place to stay, we won't have to live in a barn or under a straw stack. Anyway, well, we got there, they took everything with them except their bed bugs. The place was crawling with them. So we said, well, forget that, we'll go back to our Regency Hotel, called the barn.
Al has written a memoir, his life. And he didn't do this to make money.
No.
But I think, aren't they, what, $5? What he does is try to cover
I cover the cost.
his cost of printing it, that's all.
I charge $10.
If any, or $10.
Well, yes.
Okay,
And,
inflation.
well,
No. But anyway, if any of you are interested, they're available. He only brought 4 of them. If
Well,
you're
I got 2 in the
interested
car.
and want me to bring one, he'll send some with me. And I'm not trying to sell them. He's not trying to sell them. It's just if you find his story interesting and want to read more. I will tell you that one of my grandsons is an OSI agent. And I gave him Al's book about a year ago. And he took this book about Al Johnson to all of his OSI guys,
okay.
and they were enamored with it. I mean, that's where OSI came from, was OSS. And who is the agency today? CIA, right?
CIA and Special
Came
Forces.
as a result of OSS and OSI. So anyway, for what it's worth, I want you to feel free to come up and visit with Al and look at what he's got here.
I should run 10.
You want to have it?
No. I want you to feel free to come up. We're gonna take about a 15-minute break.
Thank you.
And I want you to visit with Al if you want,
Yeah,
one-on-one.
definitely.
He will be
I'm
thrilled
more
to
than-
talk with you
I'm
individually.
thrilled.
And look at his stuff. If you went to his house, ever had the opportunity to go to his house, you'd see a Nazi flag that he confiscated, that's hanging in his little man cave. And
That's my
his wife says, keep all that stuff in there. Anyway, come up and visit with Al. 15-minute break.